very busy, but exciting. Good time. It's a good time.
And how old are your kids again?
Marcella's 10. Maya just turned 6. And my oldest, Jelani, is 18, about to be 19.
Wow. And which of these ages do you find the most challenging in terms of homeschooling?
The 6-year-old by far.
Really?
Actually, you know what's funny? Let me rethink that. So my 18-year-old is an 18-year-old, right? So he wants to do what he wants to do when he wants to do it.
Right.
You know, he has his college work, and that's what he takes care of. You know, any additional assignments or prodding we try to give him, he's not really responsive to that.
Right.
So it's between him and the 6-year-old, because I mean, you know, Maya's 6, right? So, you know, her schooling has transitioned completely to the virtual world.
Right.
And that's not natural for any of us, but especially not for a 6-year-old. Like, they're supposed to be, you know, in the playground, climbing, jumping, running, playing, scratching their knees with their friends, you know, in a classroom. So she today she told us, you know, I don't want to do the morning Zoom meeting. And, you know, we kind of let her like skip it.
Right.
So yeah, it's probably Maya. And then Maya also would much prefer working with her mom than with her dad. Like, she doesn't want to work. I guess I'm a little tough. I don't think I'm tough, but you know, the Melissa is much more savvy with Maya. And then when things get rough, she'll call me in to help her out.
And do you think being a former teacher and now a principal, and your wife is a teacher, do you think that's an asset in terms of homeschooling? I mean, I certainly wish I was a teacher at this point.
Kinda. I mean, not. I don't know. I mean, in terms of content and, you know, activities and, you know, helping our kids along that process, sure, like it's an asset in that way. Yeah. But in terms of getting them to the table to do the assignment, no. Like, like we have been terrible because, again, we're both still working. You know, I'm campaigning, and Melissa's a 2nd grade teacher, so she has her kids that she's trying to wrangle into a Zoom call. In a space where not many have iPads or laptops or Wi-Fi or the supports at home. So it's just, you know, trying to replicate school at home is much really impossible.
Yes.
And we need to acknowledge we're in the middle of a pandemic. Like, that's traumatizing for all of us. And we just need to take a breath and be gentle with ourselves and do the best we can, you know? Yeah.
So it's 5:35. So I think
we can get going.
We'll officially start. So again, I'm Cynthia Nixon. I'm here in conversation with the amazing Jamaal Bowman, who's running for Congress from the 16th district. Well, Jamaal, I've been an admirer of his as an education advocate and activist. Also, you know, I endorsed by the Justice Democrats and New York Communities for Change, the Sunrise Movement, the Working Families Party, just so many great people and organizations, and so exciting, the idea we don't have a principal in Congress right now. I look forward next year when we do. But so tell me if you would first tell me. District 16 is a really, really broad district. Can you tell me where all it includes?
Yeah, so the district includes the North Bronx, so both the Northeast Bronx and the Northwest Bronx. So that's Co-op City, Baychester, Edenwald, Wakefield, Woodlawn area of the Bronx, as well as the Riverdale section of the Bronx, which geographically it's not really in the same area. And to get to Riverdale from Co-op City, taking public transportation will take you like 24 hours.
Wow.
But they're both in the same district. And it also includes Lower Westchester. So we go all the way up to Rye. And then right outside the Bronx, you have Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and New Rochelle, which are three of the bigger cities throughout Westchester County. But it includes Pelham, Bronxville, Mamaroneck, Larchmont, Hastings on the Hudson. And to your point, not just a broad and large geographic region, but very diverse in terms of economically diverse. There are parts of the district that are some of the wealthiest areas in the country. And there are parts of the district where you have abject poverty, where, you know, the federal government hasn't invested a dime in public housing in over a decade. So that's what you're dealing with. And then you have the economic segregation, the racial segregation, and the overall inequality that plays out in our education system, in our healthcare system, and in terms of jobs and job readiness and just community resources. So very diverse and very challenging. But it's been good to learn that people throughout the district, regardless of where they live, are ready and really excited for the kind of change our campaign has been talking about. So it's been going well.
Yeah. So I really would love to, we'll talk about the special challenges that, you know, with the coronavirus happening a little later, but can we start with you and about, so before you became a principal, you were a teacher, and
yes.
And tell me how you became a teacher and why that was something you wanted to do.
Yeah, so interesting. So like, you know, we were talking off air about my son who's 18 now. He's going to be 19 in May. He's trying to find his way. You know, he's trying to figure out what he wants to do. And I was like that at 18. I knew I wanted to play sports. So I played high school sports. And, you know, in my mind, I wanted to try to play professional football. So I played football, did well in high school, went to college to play football. And that was my focus, playing football. It wasn't on an academic major. So I actually majored in sports management, which is like business administration with an emphasis on sports.
Yeah.
And that was my major, not education. And when I came out of college and started looking for jobs in the corporate sports management arena, it just didn't feel like a good fit. And I'm one of those people that kind of follows my intuition, especially then, just kind of follow the guidance you're given. And I had a friend who was a teacher who said, you know, maybe look at education, you know, go down to the Department of Education and take a look. And literally, as soon as I walked into the school after I was fingerprinted and hired, I felt like that was exactly where I needed to be. Like it felt like a calling from when I first walked into the school. And, you know, reflecting on it, I realized it's because of, you know, how I was raised, my upbringing. You know, I was raised by a single mom along with my three sisters. You know, it sounds cliche, but it is what it is. I lived in public housing for a large part of my childhood. Grew up around amazing diversity. You know, I had friends from Italy, Ireland, you know, Egypt, you know, Puerto Rico. My friends were incredibly diverse. I went to public schools my entire life. But I also grew up during the crack cocaine epidemic. And the crack cocaine epidemic really ravaged communities and impacted my family. You know, I had a sister who was addicted to crack cocaine, and our family had to go through that struggle. And despite all of this, because I had an amazing mother and amazing mentors growing up, and I had sports like an outlet that wasn't just academic, I was able to get to college, get through college, and graduate from college. So the reason why I had that feeling of you know, this is where I needed to be when I walked into that school is because I had an opportunity to just share my upbringing and share my personal experiences. And again, it sounds cliche, but give back to children who grew up without a father, or grew up in poverty, or grew up in rough neighborhoods and rough circumstances. So, you know, it was a real pleasure to like fulfill that calling as a teacher. And I love being a principal and I love being a founder of a school, but teaching is still my favorite thing to do, particularly teaching fourth grade. Like that was like my favorite thing to do throughout my 20 years in education. So yeah.
Why fourth grade? What's the magic about fourth grade?
You know, they're little, but wise enough to handle sort of more mature content.
Mhm.
So, in my fourth grade class, like we were talking about civil rights. We were talking about the transatlantic slave trade. We were talking about US government and democracy and justice and poverty. So, fourth graders can handle heavy topics if you scaffold and break it down to a level where they can receive it. And then they're just full with this uninhibited energy and life, and they want to do everything, and they know and believe that they could take over the world, even though they come from poverty. It's like, if you don't tell kids they come from poverty, they don't really know. Right. And they just live in this uninhibited fashion. And the tragedy of the school system and the tragedy of our political systems is we beat the life out of kids with this draconian, oppressive curriculum and standards and corporate takeover of our public institutions. That's the tragedy of it.
So so explain now, because obviously that's part of the reason you decided to start a school, and not just a school, but a middle school, right? I mean, I've always, from my experience, I have 3 kids, and like middle school, like we not that we do it, but we kind of know how to do elementary school, and we kind of know how to do high school, but middle school is the really tricky one, right?
I guess it is. I mean, for me, growing up, junior high school was like the most fun I had throughout my time in school. So I had a positive middle school experience.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was because, I had an art teacher, Miss Hussey, who was awesome. And I remember her because she was so laid back. And me and my friends and I were very rambunctious. And she never like raised her voice or was rattled. And she was an amazing art teacher. And I remember I asked her to draw a picture of me, and she drew a portrait of me and gave it to me. And I never forgot that. Like she was just very impactful in my life. And then I had an animation teacher, Mr. Sacerdoti, who everyone hated, but I liked him, and I thought it would be cool to learn, because I loved cartoons growing up. I thought it would be cool to learn how cartoons are made. So, in that class, I learned a little bit about that, and I did very well. And it was the first time I was introduced to the idea of self-directed learning. Like, they told us how the tools worked, and like gave us freedom to use them as we saw fit. And it was these experiences that helped me to connect more with the research that I would learn later on as an educator, and the importance of bringing self-directed learning, the arts, the multiple intelligences, creativity into schools that are historically neglected. Because oftentimes, when you go to LaGuardia high schools, or some of the schools that are mostly white and mostly of a upper economic class, they have all of that programming. Right. But schools in the South Bronx and Title I schools don't. And that's why we decided to start a school, because I wanted to bring that holistic education, that educated rooted in the multiple intelligences, that education rooted in the unlimited potential of our kids. I wanted to bring that to the Bronx. So we organized parents, teachers, and students to brainstorm ideas for a school. I wrote the proposal. We submitted it in 2008. In 2009, we were granted permission to open up CASA, Cornerstone Academy for Social Action.
And it was a time when there was an enormous expansion of charter schools in the city. But your school's not a charter school. It's a community school, right?
It's a community district public school. It is not a charter school. And you're right. This was during Michael Bloomberg's tenure as mayor. And all he wanted to do, and not just him, mayors across the country, they wanted mayoral control of schools so that they can disempower parents and community boards and school boards, and implement a neoliberal agenda, an agenda of privatizing public schools and through charter schools. So that's what Bloomberg wanted to do. And we were lucky enough, and the unions backed us up, and they fought back against this. It allowed us to open up a district public school. So that's what we did. And just a quick anecdote, I asked to intern at a charter school because I just wanted to know from the inside out what it was like. And it felt like I've never been to military school or boot camp, but it felt like boot camp. It was very punitive. It was very draconian. Children had to earn the right to speak during lunch. Breakfast was silent. My job as an intern was to keep the seventh graders silent in the auditorium. And I watched them kick kids out of school that didn't fit the bill, and suspend kids left and right. So it was an environment that I thought was oppressive and abusive, and the racial demographic was Black children, white staff, and white leadership. So that was slavery to me, not education. So I would never go that route with opening a school.
And so, in a few words, if you, for someone who's never been inside your school, how would you describe it? So what does it feel like, but also what is the plan, what is the architecture of the school about what you wanted to create and what you have created?
Yeah, a few words. Love, first and foremost. Love of ourselves, love of our kids, love of each other, and love of the community. That love drives every decision that we've made in CASA over 10 and a half years. Creativity, again, if we give students the opportunity to be creative, they'll show you how magnificent they are, regardless of if they have an IEP or 504, if they're an English language learner, or what have you. Give them the opportunity to build and create something, not just with their hands, but with their minds and their hearts. And you'll see magnificence, and that's what we've seen. And social justice, in the context of community building. You know, this is a democracy. We live in a democracy, but everyone's not a part of that democracy. And social justice for us is all about understanding how we got to this place of inequality and then doing something about it. So those are some words that come to mind regarding that.
Thank you. So, and then where did you get the idea to run for office, and how did that happen? And was that a long simmering idea, or just wake up one day and say, I got to do this?
Yeah, when we opened CASA is an example of seeing something wrong with the system and wanting to do something about it, right? So it's an example of that within the context of education. But as all educators know, no matter how hard you work in school, you can't solve the problem of poverty. You can't solve the problem of food insecurity, housing insecurity, unsafe neighborhoods, mental health issues, criminal justice entanglement, inhumane immigration issues, environmental racism. Like, educators can't solve these problems just by the work we do in our schools. And as I looked at, not just me, but friends, family, wife, we always talk politics. And you turn on a political show, whatever channel, whether it's a left-leaning or right-leaning show, and what they're talking about, it's like Charlie Brown in the classroom. It's like, wah, 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 wah. It's like, what are they talking about? Do they not realize that, like, a young girl was bullied in her school and right after school went to the top of a building and jumped off the building and killed herself? Do they not realize that this is happening in neighborhoods across this country every single day? Why aren't we centering those who are most vulnerable in our country, which are children, seniors, and anyone who's ever felt different in this society? And, one of my practices as a principal was to, I always give my cell phone number to families and to kids so that they can contact me at any time about anything, just in case, God forbid, something happens and they need someone to speak to. And during my first year, I can't tell you how many times I was called to go find a child that didn't return home from school and decided to run away or was lost. And literally would get in my car and drive around the Bronx, and sometimes into Harlem looking for children who ran away from home. I would have students who would be self-mutilating because they were depressed or stressed or were filled with anxiety. We've had to call institutions, and some of our students had to be committed because of the mental health anguish that they were dealing with. And we existed within a system where if I wanted to suspend a student from school, there's an infrastructure in place to do so. I know who to call. I know what system to document it on. But for children who are going through mental anguish, for a parent who's living in an abusive relationship, for poverty, for all of these issues that take place outside of school, there was nothing to do about it. And our elected officials didn't seem to have our children and those who are most vulnerable in mind. So, the tipping point for me happened in 2017, 2018, when 34 children died within the K-12 school system in the Bronx, just in the Bronx, and 17 died via suicide. Mm. And when I didn't see or hear even thoughts and prayers from elected officials, and they seem to continue to have conversations about, corporate bailouts and tax breaks for the wealthy and raising the Pentagon's budget. And, and we're living in chaos here in the Bronx and throughout the district. I decided to consider a run for office. And then when I looked at, Eliot Engel's record, his voting record, as well as who funds his campaign, and talking to hundreds of people who have told us he is not present, he is not engaged, we don't see him, we don't know him, and he's been there 31 years, that's unacceptable. And Congress has the resources and the bully pulpit to do so much for our kids and our families, and they haven't been doing it. And I've been doing it my entire career, and I want to continue to do it in Congress, and hopefully we'll win and we're able to do so.
You speak so eloquently and so viscerally about restorative justice and what it can do and how it can transform our communities. Can you talk a little bit about when you're elected to Congress, what we can do with restorative justice on a national level?
Yeah, so Ayanna Pressley has a blueprint in place already, right? She's focused on a People's Justice Initiative, which focuses on a decarceration plan. We shouldn't be putting people in cages as a nation, right? So we disproportionately incarcerate people across the world, and that's something that's a punitive measure, it's a racist measure, it's an oppressive measure, and it's something that's been in place for far too long. For me, restorative justice is transformative justice. It's about community building, and it's about leveraging the voices and the brilliance of the people most impacted by mass incarceration and rebuilding a system that focuses on healing, that focuses on well-being, and that focuses on alternatives to incarceration. The majority of people who are incarcerated come from backgrounds of intense trauma and intense struggle. We have to provide the healing and the resources to help them deal with the trauma and the struggle that has been imposed on them by bad policy, right? So it's been policy driven by corruption and racism and oppression that's led to our communities being neglected of resources, for example. So bring jobs, bring job training into the community, invest in education, invest in social workers, counselors. Let's rebuild our community in the image of those who have been most marginalized and disenfranchised. That's what restorative, transformative justice is all about. It's about housing. It's about investing $1 trillion over the next 10 years to build new social housing and end homelessness in our country and replace the dilapidated public housing that currently exists. It's about a federal jobs guarantee, making sure if whoever's willing to work has a job, and not just a job, a family sustaining job where they're able to take care of their family, earn paid sick leave, earn vacation time as well. And just creating an overall environment where people can live with dignity and self-determination so that they can have the agency to thrive. Restorative justice is about rebuilding communities. It's what we did with our school, and it's what we want to extend into the communities that have been mostly neglected. And in this district, that includes the North Bronx, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and New Rochelle.
And I wonder if you have any thoughts right now about, you know, so many places in this country, there is a added pressure and added groundswell to get people out of jail who should not really be in there, particularly during the pandemic. And any thoughts about that in New York and beyond right now?
Anyone who's in jail right now for a technical violation needs to be released immediately. Mm-hmm. Anyone who is a senior and doesn't pose a quote unquote threat to society because they've been in so long and they are of a certain age should be released immediately. Again, the current structure of jail it's terror, it's terrorism to certain communities. And because of the design, this virus is going to spread rapidly. What we're seeing here in New York, in the Bronx in particular, youth offenders who are incarcerated are being compiled into a Bronx jail so that the virus doesn't spread to other youth jails. This is asinine. This is inhumane. This is abusive, and this is terror. And anyone, I believe in decarcerating the majority of people who are in prison, just for the record, pandemic or not. But definitely during this pandemic, we need to make sure those who are senior and those who are in on technical violations or those who can't afford bail, they need to be taken out immediately.
You know, you've written about your experience as a Black man under Bloomberg stop and frisk, and how it really has informed your life in positive and negative ways, you know, and also how it has influenced what you'll do when you get to Congress. And I wonder if you would speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you know, police harassment didn't start with Michael Bloomberg.
Right.
In my life. The first time I was harassed by the police, I was in 6th grade. I think I was 11 years old. And I was horseplaying with some of my friends, and the police didn't just harass us, they assaulted us. Like,
so that's like 11 or 12-year-old kid.
Yes, they beat us up. You know, I'm a victim of police brutality at the age of 11. And I remember that summer very clearly. I had scarring all over my face, going all the way down here throughout the entire summer. And you can probably still see a couple of the knots that are on my head. And what you know, as I reflect on that, you know, what did my mother think, right? Like when I came home that day with my face looking like that, and why didn't we do anything, right? Like, why didn't we take action? It's because we felt powerless, and it's because my mother felt powerless. And, you know, being Black in America and just dealing with the color of your skin on a day-to-day basis can be a detriment. When you add on top of that, you know, the harassment and the brutality that has come from the police department in my life and in many others' lives. And when you look at other marginalized groups, women, the queer and trans community, children with disabilities, you know, not just African Americans, but the Latino community, the immigrant community. All marginalized communities are communities that I connect to and relate to and feel a certain empathy with and feel a certain solidarity with. Like, I believe it's up to us to come together and unite with others to push back against this system of oppression, not just in the form of police brutality, but in the form of miseducation, in the form of under-resourced healthcare systems and a private industry that has been economically oppressing all of us. So those experiences have given me a certain level of empathy and compassion that I took into education, that we've used to build this campaign, and that will guide how we govern once we get to Washington. It's not about, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not an us versus you scarcity-based mentality. It's about cooperation and collaboration and diplomacy and coming together in compassion and care to build a world that works for everyone, not just a few, so that my children and other people's children are never harassed by the police or miseducated or treated as less than equal.
I wonder if you could, you know, you're where you are and where you personally live in Yonkers has been incredibly hard hit by the coronavirus, as you know, Mount Vernon and so many, New Rochelle. I just wonder what you are seeing on the ground and what you're hearing kind of on the ground and locally about how people are doing and what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, the virus has revealed what was already there, and
Mhm.
it's a worst case scenario for those who have been marginalized and disenfranchised within this system. So the fact that Trump did not enact the Defense Production Act quickly and urgently at the very beginning of this virus and never disseminated the resources, the full resources of the federal government, has impacted all Americans, but disproportionately Black and Brown people in this country. And in this district, it is manifested in that way. So Yonkers is majority Latino, and African Americans are not that far behind. And Yonkers by far has the most cases in Westchester County. Yonkers has almost 5,000 coronavirus cases, followed by New Rochelle and followed by Mount Vernon, which all reside within this district and are all disproportionately Black and Brown. Mount Vernon is 80% Black, and it has the third most cases in the county and still doesn't have its own testing center. The mayor of Mount Vernon had to do what she had to do to purchase her own PPEs for her hospitals and her healthcare facilities. Yonkers, I protested with nurses from St. Joseph's Hospital in Yonkers because they were demanding PPEs, they were demanding masks, they were demanding gloves and covers. So that's what we're seeing. That's the reality. That's what we're hearing. You know, I tell a story of a nurse who I know personally, who was working in the Bronx healthcare facility, and she was denied mask by her supervisor. They had the mask, and the supervisor locked them away because they obviously needed them for patients. But how can nurses take care of patients if they don't have masks?
Yeah.
So she thought that she may have contracted the virus. She had to badger her supervisor to test her for the virus. She ultimately got tested, ultimately tested positive, had to go home for 14 days, contracted pneumonia, had to endure and recover from that. And then after the 14 days, she went right back to work because someone needed to pay the bills. And I think that story captures what we're dealing with, not just in this district, but across the country, especially when you're poor, Black, or Latino.
And do you have, you know, what you're hearing from doctors and nurses and people on the front lines in your district? I mean, what are you hearing from them?
Yeah, so again, you know, initially there weren't enough ventilators. Apparently that issue has been taken care of, which is good, but still not enough masks, still not enough gloves, still not enough PPEs overall. That's what we're hearing from doctors and nurses throughout the district. And again, we don't have enough testing. Like, so we haven't tested everyone. There's many of us who can be walking around asymptomatic and be carriers of the virus. And even when we go back to business as usual, we can, you know, infect others and maybe cause another shutdown in the near future. So we need more testing. We need contact tracing. We need to maintain social distancing, and we need treatment, and we need to make sure the treatment is covered and people don't go into medical debt as a result of the treatment that they receive during this virus. That's what needs to happen. That's what's not happening. And we know because we're talking to doctors and nurses on the ground right here in the district.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like we're getting a kind of a good sense of what's happening from the news, or do you feel like there is a lot of of how people are struggling with the coronavirus that is not making its way into the news media?
Well, we don't have accurate numbers because there's not enough testing. So the numbers that are reported are being underreported. I think what the news media is missing, and what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing, is all of these issues are interconnected. We often talk about them in isolation, right? So when you close schools, right, you have children, millions of children who have special needs across this country, for example, who are not having their services met, are not receiving their services. So that's still an unanswered question in terms of the impact of closing schools, right? They tell us that we need to socially distance, but if you are working class, and you don't have the assets, you don't have the savings, you don't have the luxury to not go to work. You have to go to work. You cannot social distance. So you're putting yourself at harm, in harm's way, at risk every single day. So there are luxuries that some of us have that others do not. You know, we were speaking offline about how privileged I feel, to be able to, you know, I have a home. We had some savings. We're able to get food, etc. But I've spoken to seniors throughout the district who don't know where to go to get food and don't know how to have food delivered to them. And if they are a diabetic, for example, they can't eat all foods. You know, if the
Right.
food is too salty,
Right.
that they can't eat that food. So how are we getting, you know, not just producing food, you know, at a larger scale, but getting food to the people who need it the most, and getting healthy foods to the people who need it the most? And how are we communicating that to them? You know, so it's education, it's healthcare, it's food distribution, and obviously it's economic, especially considering, you know, May 1st is Friday, right? Working class people received a one-time check of $1,200. That's not enough to cover rent in New York State for 1 month, let alone two, which is why we're calling for something a lot more aggressive.
And what would you like to see the Democrats fighting for in the next stimulus bill?
We need a freeze on rent across the country, a freeze on utility payments across the country, $2,000 a month, not a one-time check of $2,000, $2,000 per month. We need increased testing, contact tracing, as well. We need that. Everyone needs to be tested. We shouldn't take this market-based approach to healthcare. It's insane, and people are losing their lives every day as a result. So those are a few things that we've been fighting for with our campaign, and we're pushing other Democrats to fight for the same.
And could you speak a little bit about, I mean, as you were saying earlier, all of these inequalities that have been there for a very long time. In a pandemic, they're brought to the fore even more. They're laid bare. Can you speak a little bit about the digital divide that we're facing, and what you think can be done about it, as so much educational inequality, and students that went to underfunded schools are even now falling farther behind trying to keep up with this with the virtual schooling?
Yeah, I mean, we're the wealthiest nation on earth, at least we claim to be, right? And we're constantly bragging on our GDP and how the market is doing, etc. But we've allowed the wealthy to get away with not paying their fair share for decades. We've allowed large corporations to not pay their fair share in federal taxes. So the pot is not large enough for public goods like education, housing, and other public goods to have the resources to really provide for students and families. So there are children without laptops, without iPads, without Wi-Fi, who cannot access online learning platforms and cannot connect with their teachers. So that digital divide is very real. And, you know, as a school, one of the initial grants that we received was a grant to make sure that our kids have one-to-one student to laptop ratios. So if I were still the principal, every child would have gone home with a laptop. because we unilaterally did that as a school. But we need to do that throughout the entire system. Like if we're going to have mayoral control, we need to leverage the resources of the city to make sure all kids have what they need in education. And that's not happening. So we see the achievement gap that was there. We're going to see it grow exponentially throughout this time that we're out of school. And I hope we begin to value teachers more than we did prior to this pandemic, and not just pay them more, but make sure that we put a system in place to hire more teachers to lower class size to give our kids what they need throughout the school year.
I mean, I just think of Diane Ravitch, you know, as one of your endorsers. You know, she's such an educational leader, and I wonder what you think it would mean to have a principal in Congress.
Well, can't be any principal. It has to be a principal like me.
That's true.
Many principals uphold the status quo. You know, as I mentioned before, you know, we have an intimate understanding of the impact of variables outside of school and how they determine what happens inside school. So in terms of housing as a human right, we understand the importance of that, because if a child is homeless or dealing with consistent housing insecurity, it's a lot more than likely that they're dealing with economic insecurity as well, and more than likely that they're dealing with food insecurity as well. And it's principals and educators, the right educators, who understand how these things work holistically and understand that policy needs to have this holistic community-based approach that centers well-being in our collective humanity. So, you know, hopefully I won't be the first one to win a race like this and get into Congress. I hope there will be many more principals, many more superintendents, many more teachers, many more nurses, many more working class people like, you know, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. We need real voices in Congress. Real voices who deal with real people who come from real circumstances every day. And unfortunately, right now, 50% of Congress are millionaires, and the other 50% are lawyers who work for millionaires. So there's a corporate interest, there's an interest to maintain the wealth gap that exists, and that's a glass ceiling that we're trying to break. And when we do, hopefully the floodgates open.
So I have a couple of questions here from the chat. It's one of them is so about what you're speaking about right now. So I'll ask it. This is from Sherry. Most people in Congress are old, white, and rich. If there's no sea change in this election, wherein more youthful and diverse people are elected, how would you spearhead and enact actual, real, systematic change for a true, more equitable world?
Yeah, you know what we've learned is, you know, this campaign has galvanized and excited a demographic of people who usually aren't excited about politics or who aren't paying attention. And that was intentional. From the very beginning of our campaign, we targeted those communities because we know they've been ignored. Because I remember being on that side of it and feeling ignored and feeling like the system doesn't work for me. If we're able to win this election, it gives hope and faith to millions of people across this country and thousands right here in this district. And they begin to lean in and engage in our political system and our democracy differently because they have people like me and the squad who are listening to them and using the voices of the most disenfranchised to create policy. That's what's been most exciting and galvanizing for me throughout this campaign, because people are excited at a level that they weren't excited prior to our run. Mm-hmm. And it takes movements like this to push elected officials to do the right thing. Very rarely do you see the elected official doing it on their own. You know, it's taken movements throughout American history to make real dramatic change, and that's what we're trying to do, build a movement.
I have another question here from Pierre. His question is, what is your plan in regards to the attempts of closing a hospital in Mount Vernon?
Yeah, so we are fighting very strongly against the closing of the Mount Vernon Hospital. We're fighting not just for Medicare for all to make sure everyone is insured, but to make sure we invest a lot more in healthcare than we do in our military.
Hmm.
You know, as we know, we invest in weapons manufacturing more than the next 7 countries combined. That's unacceptable. That's a political system rooted in inhumanity and death and destruction and oppression. And we want to root everything that we do with our policy in the well-being of all of us. So we are going to save the Mount Vernon Hospital, and we're going to fight to build as many healthcare facilities as needed for not just this district, but across the country. And one example of how someone like me can get that done, after we opened CASA, shortly after we opened, we started working with Montefiore Medical Center on a plan to build a healthcare facility attachment to our middle school. And I'm happy to announce and report that we are breaking ground on that healthcare facility this coming June.
Wow.
Because, you know, so that's the kind of work that can be done when you have that kind of holistic vision. We opened a school and now we're building a healthcare facility attachment to the school.
You know, you're running against a 30 or 31 year incumbent, Eliot Engel.
Yes.
And you know, he's been in Congress for a long time, but I think people's feeling is they don't really know much about him. They don't see him a lot. You know, I feel like you're going to get elected because you're a very compelling candidate, very compelling person. But can you tell me if you just answering this one question about him, if your critique of Eliot Engel, what would it be?
He's been in office 31 years and doesn't have the relationships in the district that you would think he would have after serving for 31 years. He is not present. He is not engaged with the entire district. He's done a very good job of representing about 8% of the district. And as long as he can get that demographic to continue to support him and vote for him and not engage the rest of the district, that is how he's continued to win these elections year in and year out. So he's not leading for everyone, and he's not building coalitions with everyone, and he's not involving everyone in our democracy. And when you look at his voting record, you know, he voted for an unnecessary war in Iraq that cost over $2 trillion and hundreds of thousands of lives when you include the Iraqis and people in the Middle East. He voted for the crime bill, which many of my students and families are still suffering the residual effects on that, even though that was a 1994 vote. He voted against Obama's Iran deal, which many believe kept us out of war with Iran and put a damper on their nuclear program. He voted to repeal Glass-Steagall, which many believe led to the housing crash in 2008 and the recession of 2008. And he's completely funded by corporate PACs and large donors. Again, no connection to the grassroots, no relationship with the grassroots, and no relation to the people in this district. That's unacceptable for anyone, but it's particularly unacceptable for someone who's been in office 31 years. And by contrast, I've been serving the community on the front lines, on the ground, day to day with those most disenfranchised and negatively impacted by the policies that Engel has supported for the last 20 years of my career.
There's a question I'd like to ask from the chat. It's about some, well, I'll read it, but I also would like to talk to you for a little bit about the fact that the New York presidential primary was announced yesterday, that it's not going to happen. And I wonder if you have thoughts about that and how you think it might affect your race. But in line with other anti-democratic things that are happening in the state, let me just read this question. What advice do you give to those who are working against what seems to be an anti-democratic system? In Queens, 2 women of Bangladeshi descent were removed from the ballot by the New York City Board of Elections. In Brooklyn, women of color have also been booted off the ballot. How does one continue fighting the good fight when those in power seem to be in control.
Yeah, we need to continue to grow our base, our Democratic base. And what I mean by that is this goes back to the answer I gave before. People are really excited and galvanized by our campaign, and they're excited and galvanized by campaigns across the country. And our strength is in our numbers, and our strength is in our unity. So, what I'm most excited about is the diverse coalition we are building that's engaging everyone. During the opt out movement, and Cynthia, you know about this, initially it was considered a liberal white movement. The hashtag was opt out so white until Bronx parents started speaking out against over testing in our schools and standards that were developmentally inappropriate. So the same thing needs to happen here in terms of saving our democracy. We need all hands on deck, and we need to continue to build diverse coalitions because iron sharpens iron. And when something happens that brings one of us down, we can lean on our partner to be uplifted. And we have to, I'm often criticized for being, not criticized, but I'm hopelessly optimistic. And I believe in our collective power, and I believe in what we're capable of if we work together. And the biggest advice I would give is to continue to build our coalition by engaging with those who we normally don't engage with, by engaging with those who are different than us, and by pulling them into the conversation, because we all believe the same thing. It's just many of us have been left out. To your second point, Cynthia, and your question, it was pretty heartbreaking what was announced today and what happened today with regard to Senator Sanders being removed off the ballot. He was very clear, I'm suspending my campaign, but I'm going to remain on the ballot. And it would have allowed our movement to continue to show how much we support not just him, but his policies. And when you look at polling throughout the country, the majority of Americans support his policies, right? So this changes the narrative and the conversation at the conventions. It's an attack on not just the left of the Democratic Party, but on democracy overall. And again, it's like these corporate interests who have manipulated our political system for decades and manipulated politicians by having big money in politics and dictating how they make decisions. That's what's at play here. And I'm, again, hopelessly optimistic. So I'm not worried about how it's going to impact our campaign. It may have an impact, I don't know. But what I do know is we've been working very hard to build our own authentic relationships with voters throughout the district. And this is a unique campaign, and I'm a unique candidate. And we believe that people are still going to come out in droves to support us, because we're talking to the 92% of people that Eliot Engel has been neglecting for 31 years. And they have told us time and time again, we want to change. It's time for a change. He's been there long enough.
I have a question from William Cobb, who says, Jamaal, your campaign has received support from people in every state in America. Why are so many people from outside of New York 16 supporting your campaign? And what can those of us who live outside of New York City do to assist to get you elected?
I don't know why they are.
I think that's a good sign. I think it's a good sign.
I think it's very humbling. I mean, he's right. I mean, we've, in terms of contributions, we received contributions from all 50 states, including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. So that's been amazing. I think my education background and that being a foundation of what we stand for has been helpful. And I think the progressive platform overall and what the Justice Democrats have been able to do has been huge as well. Their fight and our fight for the rights of all people and our collective humanity, I'll say it again, through a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, a federal jobs guarantee, housing as a human right, fully investing in our schools. Again, the majority of American people believe in these things. It's just the corporate interests have oppressed and suppressed their voices. So it's very humbling, and you know, it's a combination, I think, of my background and what JD has been able to do to support our campaign, regardless of what state you're in. You can go to bowmanforcongress.com/volunteer and volunteer for the campaign in whatever way you see fit. Phone banking is going to be huge for us throughout the remainder of the campaign. We literally have hundreds of volunteers making thousands of calls per week, calling voters multiple times so they realize how organized we are, how urgent this time is. So if you want a phone bank, that could be huge for us. But volunteer and or make a contribution. $1, $5, $10 can go a long way toward us winning this election on June 23rd. So we appreciate the support we get from wherever you are in the country. Thank you so much.
So I'm just, you know, Jamaal said it, but I'm just going to say it again, which is, you know, go to bowmanforcongress.com. No amount is too small or too great. Well, I guess some amount would be too great. What's your limit?
The max is $5,600. $2,800 will be used for the general election after we win, and if we are not fortunate enough to win the primary, you get that $2,800 back. But the max is $5,600, and you can't go above that. And but no amount is too small. Absolutely.
And I think phone banking, you know, phone banking is always so incredibly important, but maybe particularly effective right now when we're all at home. We're all at home. We've got our home phones, we've got our cell phones, and we're picking up. So I just want to, you know, say thank you again for running. You're such an exciting candidate, and just to say again, endorsed by the Justice Democrats, endorsed by the Sunrise Movement, endorsed by New York Communities for Change, endorsed by the Working Families Party. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Please become a part of this campaign if you're not already. And Jamaal, I'll just give you the last word.
Well, I need you to do me a favor.
Oh yes, please. Oh yes, I'm sorry. There's somebody whose birthday it is today. Her name is Becca. She is a part of Jamaal's campaign. She is a Justice Democrat. Do we know how old she is?
24.
24. Beautiful 24. My oldest one is going to be 24 this year too. So to Becca, happy birthday. It's hard having a birthday right now during a pandemic, but I hope you're having a real cake or someone sending you a virtual cake, and you know, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Becca. And Cynthia, thank you so much for doing this. I think, am I right to say you were our second endorsement after the Justice Democrats?
I think that might be right.
I think that, so you were, you believed in us from the very beginning. So thank you so much. Your campaign for governor in 2018?
Yeah,
damn, seems like long ago. But your campaign for governor was super inspirational, and just everything you represent. You're an artist, you're an activist, you're relentless, you're a mom. You just represent so much that I believe in and I support, and you're super inspiring. So thank you for doing this and for supporting us. And thank you everyone else for tuning in. We love you. I love you all, and please continue to spread the love and joy during this difficult time.
And June 23rd.
Yes, June 23rd. And mail-in ballots go out before then. So if you want to phone bank sooner, we need you. So help us out. Thank you so much.
Great.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
All right.